another great couple guests for you tonight. We got the podcast lawyer up first, and then we're talking about psychedelics to finish off your night. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Talking Junk. Talking Junk. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls.
Welcome to Talking Junk, the podcast that comes to you live every week. Two great guests, a lot of great insight, information for you to take on your journey with you. Today we got two great guests, like we always do. Like I said in the just before the intro, we have the podcast lawyer here to let us know exactly what the fuck we're doing wrong and what we can do to make it right. And then we have Greg Lawrence. He's going to come on. We're going to talk about psychedelic integration and how exactly you can fit that into your everyday regimen. So without further ado, we'll bring our first guest on, Mr. Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. How you doing tonight, Gordon?
I'm great, Jason. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. All right, so I stand corrected. Is the entertainment lawyer.
You're right about the podcast lawyer, but it's bigger than that.
I've seen that somewhere. Oh, it should be. It should be. Were you always an entertainment lawyer, or did you have another?
Well, I was a child once, but I've been practicing entertainment, media, and business law since the early 90s when I finished law school and then started my own practice fairly quickly. And as a podcaster myself, I sort of carved that niche, and it's one of the ways that I hold myself out to the community and try to provide a service.
Okay. So when did you figure it was time to stick your hands into the podcast game and start letting these people know exactly how to go about podcasting the right way, so we're protected? Yeah,
well, as an entertainment lawyer working with filmmakers and theater producers and folks in the music industries and other fields, I was, tuned in to copyrights and trademarks and business and contracts and all those kinds of things. And when I started using a podcast, I discovered podcasting first as a listener, then as a guest on a couple of shows. And I started my own podcast in 2009. And at the time, I decided, well, I'm a lawyer, I better go look into what the legal side of this all is. And I found out that there was no resource on the subject. So I did the research for myself, and I sort of figured things out and ended up writing a book called The Podcast Blog and New Media Producers Legal Survival Guide. This is about, I want to say 2011 is when that came out. And when you write a book,
come out with the dummy version yet?
I beg your pardon?
Have you come out with the dummy version yet?
No. Well, it sort of is that way, but that's actually an interesting area when you talk about the For Dummies or the Idiot's Guides. Those are trademarks. Those are famous brands that we have to be careful about. And unfortunately, people sometimes want to use those kinds of names for their shows. And that's the kind of stuff that I advise about. So I wrote the book that makes you an expert in the eyes of the public. And so I decided to own the expertise and really be visible and offer my help to the podcasting community. I was there at the beginning of several of the now very big famous podcast networks, and I'm proud to have been a part of that creation and the growth of this industry all this time. So it's pretty fun and exciting.
Now, what are some of the first steps you take when representing somebody?
Well, that depends on the somebody. Assessment, I guess, would be the first step I take, is to really, why are we here? What are we looking at? Where are you now? I do a sort of a legal issues audit, or call it a legal checkup with the new clients who come in, just to make sure we're going to hit the things that are most important and cover the priorities, but also give the client what they're really looking for. Sometimes they come in because they're having an issue with the co-host. So we're going to work on that issue and make sure we have either an agreement that, they can go forward with together going forward, or sometimes it's what I sort of term a podcast divorce. Sometimes they come in because they want to protect the title of the show, and we end up looking at trademark law, or someone's been lifting their content, and that's a copyright question. And sometimes it's just about hiring the crew and the staff and things like that, or monetizing and making deals with sponsors. So big, broad variety of things.
What is the most common thing that you see?
The most common is, I want to use this piece of music in my show, and I'm unfortunately in the position of telling them why they really can't. That it would be, cost prohibitive to try to get the permissions that are needed. People think that, well, I hear it on the radio, so it must be okay to use, or I found it on Google, so it must be okay to use, and that's just not the way the law works. So
we really shouldn't be doing something like this.
Yeah, you shouldn't. I mean, again, if you've got permission, that's great. You're only using a very small portion. There are some rules in there about what, there's a fair use exception, which we can get into if you want, where the First Amendment, freedom of speech, sort of gives some right to use stuff without that permission under very limited circumstances. And so we have a sort of complex analysis that has to be done. But for most of the folks that are coming to me, I just want to use this piece of music, I end up having to say, you're using it as a show intro. That's just not going to fly. Or we got to go get permission from the record label and the music publishers, and that ends up being a year-long journey and lots of cash spent to get the rights to use. I think the most common one I hear is, we want to use the opening riff from Back in Black by AC/DC.
It's going to cost you.
Yeah, it's also not very original, so just get over it.
Right, everybody does that. Now, we had something similar, but we just took the high road and bought an instrumental. This would be our second one. This instruments here, which we also purchased. But when we first were starting off, we had searched onto YouTube for some free beats that we could use. We found one, and then we bought the right to use it, but we didn't own it. And then a rapper came out with a song and used that very beat. Several months to almost a year later, and we just decided to take it off and
I mean, you might have been in perfectly legal and legit shape to keep using it, but now you've got this confusion of people thinking that you're endorsing that rapper, or that he's got some connection to you and things like that, and maybe he's a decent guy, maybe he's not. And sometimes the trouble's just not worth it.
Right, trouble wasn't worth it. I mean, we wanted all the smoke, but we didn't. We decided to take the high road.
Cool.
Now, when it comes down to copywriting your name, what are some of the things you can do to make sure that you're protected?
Okay, so let me address the misconception. So copyright and trademark are separate things, and a copyright protects the original work of authorship, the writing, the singing, the recording of things, those kinds of things. Your title of the show, or the name of a brand, that's a trademark, and they are protected under the law differently a little bit. So protecting a brand really starts with adopting it and using it as a brand, that is, as an identifier of the source or origin of the goods or services that you're providing. So in the case of a podcast, we have an entertainment and educational service, and when we adopt a name like Talkin' Junk for it, that can become a brand by the association that the audience recognizes that, oh, that show, Talking Junk, comes from this host, this company or production team. And that connection is what makes it a trademark. You can register and should register your trademark with the federal government here in the US, and sometimes in other countries if you're doing a significant bit of business there, so that someone else can't come along and adopt a very similar brand that causes confusion. After all, if I want to call a cookie Oreo Nabisco is going to have a problem with that, and they
Right.
can stop me because they've registered their brand and protected it.
Now, if you haven't registered and protected it, is it like a matter of time before somebody takes it and runs with it themselves?
Well, it depends on the brand, whether or not anybody else is going to find it as exciting and interesting as you do. But no, I mean, there are protections under common law as well. If you've adopted it and started generating that connection, that secondary meaning with the consumers, you do have some recourse if somebody comes along and really does a blatant ripoff of your brand. But the trademark protection takes it a little further and gives you just an easier case to prove you're the rightful owner.
So what can you do at that point to make sure you're protected? And I'll send you an example in the private chat.
Okay, all right.
That way we're not shouting anybody out.
No. What you can do in those situations, and I'm not seeing that chat right now, but
it's going to come in a second.
oh, okay, got it. What you can do in that situation is, warn them, tell them, hey, we were here first. You're using our thing, and you please stop. And if they don't stop, if they're really going to be difficult about it, then you may have to bring in someone like myself or a litigation lawyer to take it to the next step, which might be litigation, might be having to sue someone. Now, that example that you sent me in the chat, that could be troublesome one. The other aspect of this is you may be dealing with an imbalance of power, either legal power or financial power there. And if you're dealing with someone who's just got a big bankroll, all the saber rattling in the world isn't going to really change things. And so that's an opportunity maybe to negotiate some kind of a deal. But it can be a problem. Like, if you have a registered brand and you can point them to it, most lawyers who look at that are going to say, okay, yeah, this isn't worth the fight, even to that powerful, wealthy, whatever, infringer. So
this person has about 3 years over the other one using that brand.
I'm sorry, say that again.
3 years. This person has about 3 years worth of content using said brand before the other person.
Yeah, so that getting there first in time really matters in the world of trademark and unfair competition, which is the unregistered version of these things. So yeah, I mean, a few years. Look, if you can sort of point and say, look, we were there. We should have. Anybody who did a search would have seen this. You should have known. All of that weighs in favor of the original brand owner against the confusingly similar infringer.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Now, all brand names aside, right? Once you have your established brand, your Google search will eventually be the first page. It's all yours. Your brand is going out there, but you don't really see the monetization. Where do things like that start coming in?
Well, look, the brand is associated with monetization in the sense that it's the recognition of that connection between this service that I like and who's behind it. And yeah, you're right. They're not entirely connected concepts, but people tend to purchase from brands they trust and respect. And so part of owning a trademark, a brand, is building up that know, like, and trust factor. And it's one of the tools. You're right. The search engine optimization is as important because it's possible to have a very, rock solid ownership of a trademark, but if you're not putting it out there in the right ways, the customers, the clients that are looking for you aren't going to find it. My thinking with podcasts in particular, when an owner of a show comes to me and says, I want to protect the title so nobody else comes in and creates a show just like mine or that has a similar title to mine and draws my audience off. That's really the concern, right? You don't want your audience, your consumers, to be confused as to who's behind things, because especially if the other guy's making a crap show, you don't want to be tarred with that brush or smeared by their nonsense. So sometimes it's just about protecting the integrity of what you're doing.
Didn't know I was muted. Right. 100%.
Happens to us all.
Does
A
it
lot.
really, Gordon? Because it seems like it happens to me a whole shitload of times. You can play all these episodes between these 3 years, and you'll see that at least once an episode I have some kind of malfunction.
So make that your trademark.
Malfunction in the
When's it going to happen? Yeah, you could even have people betting on it. What minute marker in the show? Run a tape. What do you call it? Run a pool. I bet he does it at 12 minutes in.
I bet you majority of the time they'll win if they just pick the intro. I fuck up the intro plenty of times.
Right on.
Now, what are some of the biggest mistakes people make when getting into these topics that we're talking about?
Well, I think the two that we've already talked about. One is using something that doesn't belong to you without the proper permission is big mistake number one. Big mistake number two would be not getting your ducks in a row with the trademark thing, protecting yourself, or actually more importantly than that, choosing a title for your show without searching to find out if there's others out there already using it, because the confusion is not good for anybody.
And that's really the hard part, right? Because everybody's using something.
Yeah.
It's out there in some way.
Yeah. So, I mean, certainly searching in the podcast directories makes a lot of sense. If you're starting a new show, you want to know, okay, is this title I'm going to use already in use? And I would say if it is, choose another one. Even if it's not registered and protected with a trademark, it just doesn't make sense to be the third show, basket weaving with John or whatever. Better to be the only one in the marketplace and come up with something a little more distinctive and ear-catching. Other mistakes that come up, lots of times we have problems between the host and the co-host or the co-creators of a show who didn't get things down in writing, didn't get a clear understanding of the relationship at the very beginning. And so they should do what I call a podcast prenup, which is to avoid that podcast divorce I was talking about earlier. It's really just either a collaboration agreement or what I call a co-host agreement. Sometimes it's a full-blown co-production joint venture where there really are co-owners of everything. And, that means co-contributing to the expenses and doing equal shares or roughly equal shares of the heavy lifting with making a show. But sometimes there's a co-host who just wants to show up and be the voice. And, the percentages and the balance of things needs to be worked out. Otherwise, you end up having resentments, and the person who's footing the bill comes in, and when the money starts flowing in, they say, well, wait a minute, I want my money back. I get the lion's share. You end up having a dispute or a fight, and that can be devastating for a show. So better to have those conversations early on. I'd say that's the big mistake.
I'm so glad that that's not one of the problems that this podcast has. Mm-hmm. We have another podcast on the network called The Break Room, and that title all on its own is pretty shifty. But we tend to know exactly once or if we blow up where the splits are going to be. So that's perfect on our end. Now for people who have those ducks in a row too, right? They have their how do you get to the next level, right? You have that mainstream ability in certain fields, but you're not really getting the exposure.
Well, yeah, that's more of a marketing question than a legal question. Growing to the next level, I would say in any kind of business, the real goal of a business is to identify a problem that your listener, your audience, your client, your customer has, and offer them a unique solution, something that they want to solve. It has to be a problem they want to solve. Now, for podcasts, it's often just entertainment or information or learning about a new topic or something like that. So just be sure that you really do a good job of giving them what they came for. And so that's step number one. Step number two is getting the word out. That means using your social channels, using email. If you've got an email list, if you don't have an email list, I say you're really missing the boat, because that's a way you can definitely get in contact with your audience. Even if everything else fails, you can still send them an email. And guest appearances for podcast hosts to go on other people's shows as a guest. Give a taste of your personality, talk to people who have shows with audiences that are similar to or that are likely to be interested in your show. And that goes both ways. Have their hosts come on your show, because they'll bring some of their audience over, and some of those folks will stick around and subscribe for future episodes and things like that. I think those are the real essentials for growing a podcast. And then learn to dance and do TikTok.
Right. And that's one thing that I'm not willing to do, is just dance on TikTok.
Same here.
But you see what I mean with this malfunction thing? They would have been right to pick right when I started the podcast, because can you hear me better now?
It's a little better. Yeah. So
a little. So let's see if it's this real quick. It is very hot in here, and
I think now we lost you all together.
No, you didn't lose me.
There you are. There you are.
Now, can you hear me a whole lot better?
Yeah.
So I was hot. I had the AC on. You see what happens?
Oh, interesting. I thought it was just the wrong device selected or something.
It was both, actually. The laptop registered my headset as the mic, which would probably be over here somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And this mic wasn't hooked up.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And now your level on this one's a little hot. It's overmodulating, breaking up a little bit. So
see, look at that.
Yeah.
I can't win.
You know what? I shouldn't have distracted you. It was sounding okay. It just wasn't, I could tell you were talking into a mic and it was something else. So
that was perfect. I'm glad you did that.
Before I went to law school, I was a professional sound engineer working in live theater. And so that's one of my, one of the things I pick up on very quickly is, hey, something's not right. So anyway, but yeah. I mean, there's another mistake people make in podcasting is just, got to get the equipment in order and get things lined up ahead of time. But
right.
Content is king.
The world of kids it has a different story too.
I hear you. Anyway, I forgot what we were talking about before you broke away. Oh, how to market and grow and improve your lot. But another thing I'll say is a lot of people get very focused on the numbers with podcasting. How many downloads do I get? How many people are listening to the show? I think that's it has its importance, especially if you want to monetize with advertising, because the sponsors want to know, what are the metrics. But I think there are more important metrics than just download numbers, because you can download a show and never listen to it. And a lot of the podcast apps do just that. I would say engagement with the audience is as or more important. And I would say that, actual percentage of the show that they listen to. If you make an hour-long show, but they only listen to the first 5 minutes every week, well, what's the other 55 minutes good for? And someone who advertises at the end of the show isn't getting any value out of it at all. But if you have a really engaged audience that cares about what you're talking about and sends you back responses and things like that, now you're having a community, a conversation. People feel like they're a part of something, and you don't need as big an audience to monetize that. So you don't have to have the tens of thousands. If you've got 1,000 true fans, there's the book by that title, 1,000 True Fans, that are willing to pay you something for something that you offer them, you can make a nice living pretty easily. And so, don't get hung up on the numbers. It's important to pay attention to them, because what gets measured gets improved. On the other hand, don't let it demoralize you if the number's not growing as big and fast as you'd like. Be better off having a few good friends than a whole bunch of people who know who you are but don't care.
Right. Now, I was gonna ask, what would your message be to somebody who is a little intimidated by their numbers? But I guess the last statement you made was pretty spot on for them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add, stick with it. Don't get too demoralized, but on the other hand, maybe you're missing an opportunity, or you're doing something in a way that is turning people off when they listen. So there's always room for improvement in education, but so many people get paralyzed by the analysis of things, and they just don't iterate often enough and well enough. Nobody's going to have a perfect episode every time, as we've proven today. But the point is, you keep doing it, and you learn from those mistakes, and you get a little better each time, and so on. Another thing is, ask your audience or your potential audience, who's your ideal listener, and what do they want? What's that problem that you can solve for them, and how can you offer the best solution out there?
That is, I couldn't have said it better myself. That's great.
Right.
Right now, I just want to take the time to give you, to just let everybody know exactly where they can find you, what services you would offer, and what the name of your podcast and where we could listen.
All right. Well, the best place to find me is just GordonFiremark.com. My name, GordonFiremark.com. That is sort of a clearinghouse for some of my online products and services that I offer. I have courses for podcasters and other creators, as well as downloadable forms and templates. If you are a podcast creator or a YouTuber, this is where you want to go. I also have a YouTube channel where I do a weekly live stream show called Legit Podcast Pro. You can find me on YouTube at GFiremark and or Legit Podcast Pro. And that's just a weekly, 10-minute or so tip that it's also a podcast. You can find it on the podcast apps. A tip or a strategy or a little bit of legal advice of some sort on a topic related to podcasting and media creation. And of course, if you need a lawyer, you want some help with something like a trademark registration or getting your contracts in order, and you're not the do-it-yourself type, reach out to me directly, and I'd be happy to help you out. And my other show, so there's Legit Podcast Pro, and then the other show is called Entertainment Law Update. That's much more of a aimed at other lawyers kind of a show, but anybody's welcome to listen. We do a monthly roundup of the legal case law news in the world of entertainment, and have a good time. Actually, I'm recording an episode tomorrow morning, so that's what's coming up. You're muted again. There you go.
Be sure to look out for those. Go to GordonFiremark.com and get those links going. Gordon, thank you again for coming on. I couldn't have asked for a better guest.
Thanks, Jason.
The insight was amazing.
Yeah. It's been great to be here, man. I always like the opportunity to share what I know and what I do, and give some help and make new friends too. So thanks for having me.
The pleasure was all ours.
Great.
And just like we alluded to a little while ago, sometimes you can figure out sponsorships and things like that without having the numbers. Which is why I'll take you right now to a word from our sponsors.
Subscribe for more videos.
Don't forget to like, comment, and share.
Me and my team, whenever we link up, they gonna be drink up. We sit down, relax, and have few glasses when there's things to think about. Like I'm nice with the boss when I tend to the bars, and I'm not talking drink ups. So tell the bartender that's tending the bar to please pass me a big cup up. And tell that waitress is waiting on us to put a little ice in it. Now watch the ice become weightless like the spaceships that I be sitting in. No wait and listen, no, they're waiting for that tropical twist that'll tickle your taste buds. Now taste some. Now I insist it's the Dizzle.
Be sure to go to the dizzlebrand.com right now and get you a bottle.
Nice.
Thank you. I try. Production, directing, everything in one hat is a challenge, but we all seem to get it done when we need to.
Indeed.
And that bell, I don't know whose it was, but it's telling me it's time to bring on our other guest, excuse me. He is going to tell us tonight, by he, I mean Mr. Greg Lawrence. He's going to tell us tonight a little bit about psychedelic integration. So without further ado, let's bring on the psychedelic coach, Greg Lawrence. How you doing tonight, Greg?
Oh, wait a second. Oh, I think I'm unmuted now. I didn't know I was supposed to talk about psychedelic. Like something keeps popping me up telling me this computer's asking for googleusercontent.com. Is that from StreamYard?
I don't think so.
All right, I'm going to keep blocking it. And if I disappear for some reason, you know it's because of a computer error. Somebody's apparently trying to hack me. How you doing, man? Thanks for having me on.
Doing okay. The pleasure is all mine. So just a second ago before you broke up, I heard you say you didn't know you were talking about psychedelic integration.
No, I'm just kidding you, man. Why else would you want to talk to me? I mean, there are many reasons, but the title is usually what intrigues people.
Right. Which is why this title is called A Lawyer in Psychedelics. What can go wrong?
You'd be tripping.
Right. Yeah. And as you can see, a lot went wrong tonight.
I was wondering what the connection was between us. Now I get it.
I'm going to sign off, guys. Thanks for having me. Good luck, Greg.
Thanks a lot, Gordon. I appreciate you coming on.
Have a great night.
Now, Greg, how did you even get into psychedelics?
Oh, my God. So that's a bit of a story. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
All right. So like from my late teens through my late 20s, I used psychedelics along with just about anything else I could put in my body to alter my consciousness. Mostly, I didn't know it at the time, but I didn't want to feel what was going on inside of me. And in my late 20s, I got mixed up with hard drugs, and my life spiraled out of control pretty quick. So I had to.
If you don't mind me asking, what type of hard drugs?
There was always cannabis. I abused cannabis for many years, but what really set me off was meth. And
that is a big difference, Greg.
I am dating myself, but back in the day, we used to snort it. We didn't have like pipes, and we didn't freebase or anything. And
that is still a big difference. Hey, yeah. What hard drugs we talking about, Greg? I used to smoke a little weed, but I used to snort some meth too. That is a big gap.
There was just about everything in between those two, but that was the one that really pushed me off the edge. I mean, when I got pulled out of where I was living, which was not a very nice place to be, I didn't have a car. I know I had a car when I moved in there. And to this day, I can't tell you what happened to the car. I don't know if I sold it, lost it, got stolen. I was about to not have any source of income. I got pulled out of my physical surroundings, moved away from the area I was in, cut ties with everybody, went cold turkey, and I quit using all substances except for cannabis, which I abused for about 20 years. I mean, I smoked just about daily. Once again, just trying to keep this contained in here before it bubbled over.
Right.
And about 10 years ago, it got to the point where it started bubbling over. It's like I realized that I had a lot of childhood trauma that had never even been touched, and a lot of things that happened in my life that needed to be addressed. So I started seeing a coach and a therapist. And at the time I smoked cigarettes, I told my coach, I said, I'm trying to quit. And he said, well, I read this study that said psilocybin helps people quit smoking. So I said, I did mushrooms before. I know about that. I went and got some.
That's a crazy statement, because I dabbled in my youth with mushrooms, and I found that when I was on mushrooms, I needed to smoke weed a whole lot more.
Well, when I used to smoke weed, I'd always want to smoke cigarettes. But you've anchored those things together. You know what I mean? But there are studies in which they have helped people with smoking cessation using psilocybin. But you have to have that intention and everything. I didn't know anything about using psychedelics other than using them recreationally. I went and I got some mushrooms, I took them, and I didn't quit smoking that night, but I saw all kinds of shit from my life and what was my part in it and other people's part, patterns I was living out and things I wanted to do that I wasn't doing, things I was doing that I didn't want to do. And when I got done, the next day, I thought, well, I've seen all that now, so all of that's going to change. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, everything was the same. So rinse, repeat a couple of times. I'm like, how come I'm finding all this stuff out, but nothing's changing in my life? So I started looking around. I found out there's this thing meetings. It's Psychedelic Integration Circle. It's like a safe space for people to talk about this stuff. I've been leading those circles for almost 8 years now, but at the time, I'm asking people questions. What do you do? How do you integrate this stuff? How do you make changes? Nothing people were doing worked for me. So I had to kind of figure out for myself what works for me. How can I be making changes or shifts so this stuff sticks? And I finally figured it out how it worked for me. I started making changes. I started leading those integration circles. Because I was doing that, people would come to me and ask me questions and ask for counseling. And I thought, well, it makes sense to know more about this. I got certified as a psychedelic integration coach. I owned my own business at the time, and I kept like getting coaching work coming. And, you know, I kept kind of telling the universe, hey, I have a day job, you know, and after a while, it just got to the point where it made sense, like this could be what I do. And it's a lot more rewarding than what I used to do. So.
Now that sounds like an amazing story from start to finish. When exactly? All right, let me rephrase that question, because it's there was a lot going on there, right?
Yeah.
So when you finally found the psychedelic integration, first of all, what state are you in? Because I know it's not legal everywhere now.
It's not legal here either. I mean, I'm in California. I'm up by Los Angeles.
Okay, so it's still not legal in Cali.
No, there's only a few places in the country where stuff has really been legalized. Some of it's for medical use, or like you have in Oregon, they have, the psilocybin centers where you can do it for non-medical use. This is probably optimal right now, but I think the problem is, it can still be prosecuted. It can be prosecuted unfairly. A white guy my age has a lot more chance of getting, passed up by the cops than a young man of color. So
right.
So lower on the totem pole for district attorneys doesn't mean they can't prosecute it if they don't want to, I believe. So I think
my Puerto Rican ass is going straight to jail.
Yeah, exactly.
I get it.
It's the man bun, dude. Get you every time.
Hey, but I grew up in New York. I didn't have a man bun. It was straight buzz cut all the time, shape up, and it was still the same thing. It's still the same thing. It is what it is, Greg. It is what it is. It's the world that we fucking live in. And more often than not, they just want to take away the stuff that can presumably help you. Keep you addicted and locked in.
There's nothing that can be patented. There's no long-term treatment. MDMA is on the cusp of being approved for treatment-resistant PTSD. But that means that people with treatment-resistant PTSD can have it prescribed as a treatment and get it in a course of treatment that's probably going to cost $15,000 to $20,000 a round if they can get a chance to pay for it. And it's not, that's good for those people, but it's still keeping something out of the hands of other people who I believe have a right to alter their consciousness if they want to.
Right.
I believe in cognitive liberty.
What was that? You believe in what?
Even cognitive liberty.
Okay.
I can alter my consciousness and explore my consciousness in my mind and work on things myself without the government intervening and telling me that I can't take a plant from the ground and
I get it. 100%. Now, what exactly, where was the turning point for you when you knew that this method was the method that you wanted to use? Because you said you had everybody's method that was in your groups before tried. Now, after you tried those and they didn't work, when did you kind of notice that regimen was working for you?
Well, I have, that's like the smaller of my bookshelves. I mean, I got things on psychology, all kinds of personal and spiritual development, NLP, HNLP. I've collected a lot of things that just work for me. And a lot of them have to do with really kind of reprogramming this thing, because there's very little difference structurally or performance-wise between my brain as an organ, not my mind, but my brain, and this thing, which is a computer. It's a more powerful computer than the one that landed men on the moon and brought them home, but it's not very smart. The difference between these two things is this has a lot of quality control on what gets put into it. There's not a line of code in there that has been combed through by somebody and says, okay, if we do this, this is what we're going to get from it. If I poke on that thing that says weather, it's going to find sensors and things in places and tell me what the weather is here in Northridge, California. It's pretty reliable. This thing gets programmed for years before anybody starts evaluating anything that's going on. When I become self-aware and I start realizing that I'm like a separate person from everyone else, one of the first things I do is I start listening to this thing. And all it's filled with is things that other people have said and done throughout my lifetime, good, bad, or indifferent. A lot of those things are negative about me and other people. There are things wired into my brain that I think are, it's easy to look at my beliefs about things like race, ethnicity, sexual preference, religion, all these things. Those are easy to like take out and look at and see what's going on with me and see like my implicit and explicit biases. But there are things wired into me that I think are just the way the world is. I don't even think they're really beliefs, but they are. They're beliefs that have been implanted in my head before I had the ability to evaluate things and determine what. There's a lot of things that I do in my work with myself and others that have to do with starting to tell this thing what it is I really want to get from it. Because the way that we interact with our brains and our minds is really kind of screwed up.
Right. I agree tenfold. Now, when I had my time down in Florida, I met a wonderful lady by the name of Cindy Stanford, and she opened me up to the world of adverse childhood experiences. And that's kind of what you were talking about there. You had beliefs instilled in you that weren't necessarily your beliefs, that weren't necessarily for you, but they were cemented so deep and rooted into your memory that your whole world was central to these beliefs.
Yeah, but the problem is there's something inside of you that understands that they don't work for you. Right. There is something going on inside that says, I know this is how the world is, but it doesn't feel right to me. And that's because I realize that's not really my belief or my truth. That's from somebody else.
Now, what were some of the beliefs and truths that were deeply rooted inside of you that you kind of wanted to purge from your everyday living?
Well, I mean, most of those things have to do with how I view myself. Is what it really comes down to. I mean, there wasn't a lot about the world that I couldn't learn on my own and figure out. But when it comes to judging yourself, this is where most people get tripped up. Most people, when you talk to them, believe that in some way, shape, or form, in some areas, they're different from everybody else. Because if they're really down on themselves about something and you ask them straight up, hey, if that was happening to that guy over there, would you have the same opinion of him? They'll say no. They'd cut him some slack or they'd be compassionate toward him. But it's hard to do that toward yourself. So and because of things like projection, the world helped to sort of adjust my lenses and change the way that I viewed other people.
I get it.
But it's an ongoing process. You're never done.
No, never. You're always learning. You're always processing your surroundings, the people in your life. I get it tenfold. Trust me. Everything that you're saying kind of connects. When it comes down to the psychedelics, and you notice that you were part of this bigger framework, but it was all kind of interconnected together. How did you know it was time to seek that guidance into using this substance in a way where it's going to regulate your everyday?
Well, the first time that I had the experience where, the big difference between the way that I was using psychedelics and what happened the first time I took psychedelics after a long hiatus was that my locus of attention was pointed inward. This is where intention plays a big part with psychedelics. When I'm looking outside, that's where the substance looks. As soon as I started pointing inside through therapy and coaching and trying to figure out what was going on in my life, that's where the substance went. So it showed me a lot of things that needed my attention. But the problem was because of all the conditioning that I have, because of the conditioned responses I have, and the triggers that I have, and the anchors that I have that dictate the way I operate to a large extent, I wasn't able to make changes in those areas by just knowing that that thing needed to be done. You know, there's a lot of talk in psychedelics about neural pathways. So I'm right-handed. If I want a new neural pathway, I can put this pin in my left hand like this. Well, the first thing I notice is I don't know what the hell's happening with my hand. Like I just do this automatically, but here I'm like, does my thumb go there? And is my finger right? It's really uncomfortable. And if I start writing,
overanalyze.
yeah, well, my brain is immediately then going to say, wait a minute, writing and left hand, that thing is firing now. And if I keep repeating that, that will become a stronger neural pathway, but I have to do something. So psychedelics don't just rewire your brain automatically. They give you insights and they provide an environment of neuroplasticity, which means for a certain period of time after the experience, it's easier to make new habits, patterns, ways of being and thinking, creating new neural pathways. But you have to do something different than what you were doing. If what you were doing before the experience was those things and nothing else, you're not changing anything. So what worked for me, back to your question, was I had to do something differently in the aftermath of an experience. And usually that was something that didn't feel good. It was like this. It was uncomfortable. It didn't feel natural. And again, with this left hand, if I start doing something like writing a grocery list, my brain's going to be screaming at me, you know, put the pin in your right hand. And that's what it does when you try to make changes, because our brains are still operating thinking that it's, 15,000 years ago and that winter's coming, there's not going to be much food. So you shouldn't waste a calorie by changing the way that you do things. Energy should just go the way that energy's always gone, so we can conserve things and keep them the same. And that is not how you make changes in your life. So those two things conflict. You have to actively want to do something differently. And that something can be thinking differently, can be setting a boundary, or it could just be realizing something differently. It might be something like making your bed every day when you haven't done that before, but something has to change or shift to be a little bit different. And it can be very slight, but that little variation gets bigger and bigger over time. It starts small.
Right. And you can't expect change if you're doing the same thing over and over again.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in whatever way it makes sense to do that, that's what I hit upon, and that's what worked for me. Because what a lot of people were telling me is like, you have to meditate and journal and all of the things that people do, but those were things I was doing already. I learned that I had to do something differently, and that wasn't always an easy thing to do.
Right. But we're not always used to change. We're used to repetition.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So now your success stories out there, you own your own practice. What are some of the things that you see common in your I guess you don't call them patients. What do you call your
I have
clients?
Yeah. And about half of the work I do is psychedelic integration. The other half is what you would call standard coaching. And in both of those cases, most people come to therapy for the same reason they do for coaching. Usually because they're doing something they don't want to do. They're not doing something they want to do. They're feeling something they don't want to feel, or they're not feeling something they want to feel. And those things can be mixed up, like I'm doing this thing I don't want to do, so I'm feeling this thing I don't want to feel. But, those are like the umbrella things that people come to coaching for, whether it's integration coaching or whether it's just standard coaching. Something's going on in my life. I don't like the things that I'm doing or the way that I'm feeling. I'm trying to make changes in my life, but they don't stick. With psychedelic integration, a lot of people come depression, trauma of some kind, and they want to know how to get past that. And what the psychedelics do is they'll show you areas of your life, they'll illuminate something for you, and that's something that you can work on after the experience. They amplify things, they call our attention to things. So call our attention to things that we had no idea were bothering us sometimes. Psychedelic experience, sometimes you'll find out, I had no idea that this bothered me so much, that I liked this that much, or I didn't like that much, that I felt this way about that person. It'll just get dumped out. It's sitting right here, right now, but it takes that experience sometimes to really highlight that, show it to you.
Now, how do you approach psychedelics? I know a lot of people work it into their everyday regimen by microdosing. But when you're looking for that epiphany that you're speaking of, would you recommend macro dosing instead?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that psychedelics are not for everyone. There are people with certain psychological considerations. If someone who has had psychosis, that diagnosis themselves or in their family, they probably shouldn't be using psychedelics. There's more talk about it now, but it's pretty standard to say people with bipolar disorder should probably not take psychedelics or exercise extreme caution. People using certain medications, either sometimes they're contraindications and something might happen to them health-wise, or there are some medications like certain antidepressants will act on the same receptors that say like LSD and psilocybin, magic mushrooms do, and they may block the effect. So it's not something I recommend for everyone, but even when it is, I think that it's still very individual to the person. Some people take large doses, some people take smaller doses, some people mix things up, but that's a very individual choice, I think.
So there's really no standard regimen for somebody. It's all catered to the individual.
Absolutely. And there are ways of sort of dipping your toe in the water these days. Cannabis can be very psychedelic at certain levels. There are people who have cannabis experiences like for working with trauma and things like that.
I've heard of people hallucinating on cannabis, and I'd call bullshit on that. In my day, I've never experienced any hallucinating on marijuana at all. Well, let alone mushrooms. I'd never hallucinated on mushrooms either.
Most of those things, with both of those, I'm going to say that if you cut yourself off from the outside world, there's an amplification of the effects. So a lot of people will say like they're going to have kind of experience they have, say, like in a clinical trial. So work with a guide or something, and they're going to listen with headphones and eye shades. There are a lot of reasons they do that. Our brains are really busy right now. Like talking to you, like 60% of my brain is busy just trying to categorize, remember, file all the things away, compare what you're saying to other things I've heard, come up with a response. Your brain's super busy, even if you're sitting in a room alone, just, figuring out what's going on around you. I'm a person, that's a wall, that's where that thing goes, here's my orientation. But when you cut those things off, it amplifies this experience significantly.
So would you recommend a sensory deprivation tank when you're using psychedelics?
I would go for eye shades and headphones first and make sure that you're okay with that. Anytime, if someone's working with psychedelics, if they're not used to them, I always recommend they have someone around them, a sitter of some kind. But back to your question, I think that cannabis much. There's a guy named Daniel McQueen who's in Boulder, Colorado. He runs an organization called Medicinal Mindfulness. And they train psychedelic guides, but they have something called conscious cannabis circles. And in those, they mix certain kinds of cannabis. They imbibe quite a bit of it, and people will have eye shades on. They'll be playing music. I went through that one time. It's a very profound, very powerful experience. But before I did that, at the time I smoked cannabis semi-regularly, I didn't smoke any cannabis for like a week and a half. And there is a big difference when you don't smoke for a while and when you do. And people who don't have a lot of experience with cannabis, well, I remember, I didn't smoke cannabis for about 5 years. That 5 years is when cannabis changed from being like, some leafy, grassy stuff that you got in a huge baggie of $10 to what it is now. And the first time I smoked it, I'm like, oh my God, what happened?
I get it. Have you done a ayahuasca journey?
I have, yeah.
Now, all psychedelics, some people may say are the same, but they're definitely not. What in your experience was the most profound one out of all of them?
It's hard to say most profound because, like you say, they are different. They tend to, for the most part, take you to sort of a similar space because the space is you at a very deep level. But I would have to say that iboga, which is something that comes from the root of a shrub in northern Africa, which is a very powerful substance and people should be very careful about using, was definitely something that was a game changer. 5-MeO-DMT is a substance that is not as psychedelic as the other psychedelics, but it instantly causes ego death. And it just takes you to a place where you're just a part of everything. You know, there's no longer you, the individual.
I've heard some DMT users say, so there's two stories that I've heard. One DMT user said that they experienced what most DMT users experience, and it's like a world in its own, but everyone is connected into that said world. There are certain things in that world that everybody has reported seeing. And others say that they lived a whole nother life.
Well, there are two different DMTs, okay? One is NN-DMT. That's probably what these people are talking. When you say DMT, it's usually NN-DMT. That's super psychedelic, very colorful, lots of visuals, and people will report like visiting other worlds or entities and living other lives. You know, it's a highly psychedelic substance that'll take you somewhere else. 5-MeO-DMT just sort of takes away the part of me that is me, and there's nothing left but everything else. I'm just a part of the entire universe, and there's not a lot of visuals or colors or things like that in it. It's just a way of sort of taking away the me from the experience of life. This ego construct that tells me I'm a separate person disappears for a while.
Have you done both versions?
Yes, I have.
And for you, that the ego death is the best DMT to have.
Well, that was something that was profound for me. It can be quite alarming to some people. You know, some people do 5-MeO-DMT and they're shaken up. Not being here for a while and then coming back and seeing yourself sort of being put together little by little. That can be very unsettling to people.
That sounds interesting to me.
Doesn't it?
It does. It really does.
Not for everyone.
I mean, back when I tried mushrooms, I did it to kind of my first intentions were to hallucinate. I wanted to get the experience before life got to me, marriage, kids, whatever it be. But I never really got that experience. I got more of what you're talking about, kind of like an inner journey. What's happening around you, what's happening in life, seeing you're one with everything around you. That's more what I got out of everything. I would much rather have ran around with whatever I can see, but that's not the case. Now, DMT, it intrigued me a little bit. There were a lot of compelling stories that made me want to partake at least once in my life, but I never got the chance before any of it. Would you recommend somebody who is pretty emotionally intelligent, knows exactly what they're trying to look for in life and exactly where they've been in life, what lessons they needed to learn, and what generational curses they needed to break? If they have all their ducks in a row, would you recommend somebody going and trying to seek some of this treatment out?
If that's something that they want, I would recommend that they try to find somebody that they're very comfortable with to help them with that experience. You know,
Okay.
Depending on what it is. If you're talking about taking a couple grams of mushrooms, have a friend with you in case you need help. If you're talking about something like DMT, I recommend having someone who's experienced around to assist you in case it's not as pleasant as you would like it to be.
Professionals are always good. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of...
When you talk about who this relates directly to your question. In the clinical trials, like the government-sanctioned clinical trials, when people go in and they apply and say, I want to have this experience, and they're going to have licensed therapists working with them before and after. They're going to have 2 licensed therapists as sitters during the thing, but they still say to the person, I want you to think of the least favorable psychological state you've been in the last few months and ask yourself if you would be okay with that being amplified 5 to 10 times, because that's a distinct possibility. And if the answer is no, it's probably not something that you want to do. Psychedelics can be an uplifting, awesome, mind-expanding experience, but they are also amplified, and sometimes they're not very gentle about it. They'll just push you into a corner where you have to feel something you've been trying not to feel for many years, sometimes for most of your life. So it's something that should be approached with caution, because it may not be pleasant, and that's just putting that out there in the interest of harm reduction, because people should know that you can get very uncomfortable during that experience.
Right. Greg, thank you for coming on and giving us all this information. We know you're a busy man, and right now I just want to give you the floor and give our listeners and your potential clients a little insight on where they can find you, how to reach out, what services you offer, and so on and so forth. This is your time to sell yourself, sir.
Well, you can find me. I'm Greg Lawrence on Facebook. My website is Psychedelic Integration Specialist. I'm Psychedelic Integration on Instagram. I help people with coaching issues. About half of that psychedelic integration. So I help people with preparation, like how to be ready for an experience like this, and then processing the experience afterwards to help them get whatever it is they wanted to get out of the experience. And I help people with regular life issues, like this thing makes me anxious, that thing makes me angry, I'm not sure what to do about this. All of those things that we can work on in coaching. Whoa.
Amazing. And there is your website right there.
Awesome.
For those of you that want to get on there, take a look. This is exactly what you're looking for here. Services are right here. Click on it. You see exactly what he's offering you, and make sure to take advantage of this opportunity. Greg, thank you very much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. We hope to have you back on.
Thanks for having me, man. It was a blast.
Thanks a lot. You have a wonderful night.
You too. Take care, man.
There you have it. Two great guests for another beautiful Tuesday night. Now, we talked to two great professionals. We got a lot of insight. And one of the things that we were talking about in the beginning of the episode on where do you think, it was asking the audience let me calm down. It was to ask the audience where and in what areas could you improve? One of the things I was told was that on these interviews, I try to act like myself, but I kind of hold myself back. It's fucking the truth, right? Some of these motherfuckers can't handle exactly who I am. And granted, maybe they shouldn't be on my show then. But you all know for a motherfucking fact that the person you are and the person you portray yourself to be in professional settings are two totally different people and would probably not like each other had they met each other in real life. There's not one person that cannot relate to that statement right there. I can almost guarantee that. And with that being said, I'll continue to give you the little snippets of business and the little snippets of me. If you want full me, you can go to the break room. We go on Friday nights. We talk about everything now. There's a lot of things happening, but we hope to keep bringing you this content regardless of which show you watch. YouTube, you get the best of both worlds. The podcast sites, we're looking to get back on it. We had a lot of mishaps during the year, and we haven't really posted. It's kind of too late to get all those episodes on there right now. So I'll say this. I'll say going forward, maybe next month, we will start putting all of these new episodes on the podcast sites, and you can take these old episodes as vault episodes, and we'll throw one episode on there maybe a month to give you a little insight of what we were doing on this past year. But if you cannot wait and you need to eat this content, you can find it on YouTube. The vault is always on YouTube. Talking Junk Network on every social media. Make sure you go hit like, share, and subscribe. It's gonna help us grow. It's gonna help us grow this content. We can start getting more people on here that are gonna fit what you want to hear. And if some of these things aren't what you want to fucking hear, then I've told you time and time again, it's exactly why we're talking junk. Because if this fucking episode is not for you, if these 2 interviews didn't have anything for you, then maybe the next one will, or maybe the one before did. You know what I mean? Which is also why we're giving you 2 fucking interviews per episode now. Double the content in one day. What else can you ask for? We're giving you everything we can. All we ask in return is to leave a comment, drop a like, share, subscribe. Share us with the people you hate if you don't like us. If you like us, share us with the people you love. It's only right. You cannot keep us to yourself regardless. But like every week, I am going to sign off with the notion that we will continue to come back every week with 2 great guests and give you this fucking information for your everyday life. And maybe it's not for your everyday life. Maybe you could give 2 fucks about it. But it's a great conversation. So fucking listen every week. See you later. We love you. Peace out. And if you don't like me, bitch, change the station.
Thank you for tuning in to Talking Junk.